Every single Wednesday evening without a single exception, my daughter and my grandson logged onto their computer to play a virtual game of chess with me while we kept a video call running on the side screen. She had not missed a Wednesday in 10 years. It was the absolute anchor of my week. So when the video call screen remained completely dark and the chess lobby showed them as offline, I felt a sudden violent drop in the pit of my stomach. My wife looked across our living room, observing my rigid posture, and whispered gently that perhaps they were just caught up with homework or running a little late from grocery shopping. I dialed my daughter's cellular phone anyway, but the line went straight to a cold, automated voicemail without a single ring. Then I dialed my son-in-law. He answered the phone far too quickly. His voice was entirely too smooth, as he told me my daughter was out visiting a colleague from her school for the evening and had left her phone on the kitchen counter. I asked to speak to my grandson. After a heavy, suffocating silence that seemed to stretch into eternity, he replied that the boy was already fast asleep in bed and could not be disturbed. That was the exact moment I grabbed my heavy coat and my truck keys. If this story of survival and instinct is already pulling at your heart, I am profoundly grateful you are taking the time to read it. Please share in the comments what city or country you are watching from today, because I would deeply love to know how far these messages of family resilience travel. Please note that some elements of this story have been fictionalized and adapted for storytelling purposes, and any resemblance to actual names or specific geographical places is entirely coincidental, but the underlying psychological truth is one you should carry with you for the rest of your life. For a decade, that midweek video call came through with the reliability of a heartbeat. It was a ritual I built my entire existence around, without ever fully acknowledging its immense weight until the silence replaced it. My name is Garrison Locke. I am 69 years old and a retired heavy machinery diesel mechanic, living in a sprawling timber-framed cabin deep in the rugged snow-swept expanse of the Bitterroot Valley in Montana. I spent 45 years of my life rebuilding massive logging excavators, repairing hydraulic systems on bulldozers, and welding shattered steel plates in temperatures that would freeze a man breath to his beard. My hands are permanently stained with engine grease and scarred by jagged metal, and my spine aches fiercely whenever the barometric pressure drops before a blizzard. But I wake up every single morning looking out over the pine-covered mountains, profoundly grateful for the quiet, isolated, and deeply peaceful life my wife Martha and I have carved out of this wilderness. Martha is 66 years old, possessing incredibly kind eyes and a fierce, unyielding spirit. She spends her winters quilting massive, intricate blankets and baking sourdough bread that she gives away to the local forestry crews. She always tells people that the harsh mountain winters require warm routines to keep a soul from freezing. I always say she is the only heat source this old house actually needs. Our daughter Evelyn is 35 years old. She works as an advanced high school biology teacher in a wealthy gated mountain community nearly 2 hours north of our valley. She has maintained our Wednesday night chess and video call tradition since our grandson Miles was born 10 years ago. Rain or shine, whether she was drowning in grading papers or utterly exhausted, that call always connected. Evelyn would prop her laptop on her massive kitchen island, and Miles would climb up onto a bar stool, eagerly moving his digital knights and bishops while talking a mile a minute about his science fair projects and the wildlife he had spotted in their woods. That particular Wednesday evening in late November felt exactly like any other harsh winter night when the sun began to dip below the jagged peaks. Martha had a massive cast-iron pot of venison stew simmering low on the wood stove, and our entire cabin smelled intensely of roasted root vegetables and burning hickory. I was sitting in my worn leather recliner studying a book on antique engine restorations while Martha walked back and forth from the kitchen to the dining table, patting my shoulders softly every time she passed by, just as she had done seamlessly for 42 years of marriage. Martha called out from the kitchen, reminding me that Evelyn was supposed to give us an update on the regional science tournament Miles had entered. Miles had apparently built a working miniature hydroelectric generator and had been practically vibrating with excitement about it all week. I called back to Martha that I remembered perfectly because he had emailed me a dozen incredibly detailed blueprints over the weekend. The time for our call finally arrived. I set my heavy book aside and pulled my laptop onto the coffee table, opening the video application and the chess lobby. Martha pulled her rocking chair close to my side. We both leaned forward, staring at the screen, waiting for the familiar digital chime of an incoming call. The minutes dragged by with excruciating slowness. Nothing happened. The screen remained stubbornly blank. Martha smoothed her thick woolen apron and suggested softly that Evelyn was probably just delayed by a sudden snow squall on the treacherous mountain roads. I agreed out loud to comfort her, but deep within my chest, my heart gave a slow, dreadful thud. When a significant amount of time had passed, I picked up my mobile phone and dialed Evelyn directly. The line did not even attempt to connect it, simply dropped immediately to her voicemail. I heard Evelyn's bright and deeply familiar recorded voice telling me she was away from her phone and to leave a message. I spoke into the receiver, attempting to keep my voice light, telling her it was her dad just checking in for our game and asking her to call us back the moment she had a chance. I set the phone down on the table very carefully. Martha brought 2 steaming ceramic bowls of venison stew to the living room and sat heavily beside me. She handed me a spoon and rationalized that Evelyn was likely overwhelmed with getting Miles ready for his tournament presentation because midweek nights were always a chaotic rush in their household. I nodded mechanically and told her she was absolutely right. But as the evening progressed into the dark of night, I tried dialing again and again. Every single attempt went straight to that cold, lifeless voicemail. Her phone was completely powered down. Unable to bear the suffocating silence any longer, I decided to try a different avenue. I dialed Desmond. Desmond was Evelyn's husband. He picked up the call almost instantly. His voice sounded remarkably smooth, polished, and incredibly relaxed, like a corporate executive who had already mentally rehearsed a script for a difficult client. He answered the phone by saying, "Hello there, Harrison." I frowned so deeply my eyebrows ached. I firmly corrected him, stating that my name was Garrison and not Harrison. He offered a quick, breathless chuckle and a hollow apology, claiming he had been distracted by reading a complex financial report. I bluntly asked him why my daughter was not answering her phone for our standing weekly call. He let out a tiny, calculated sigh that was so brief and artificial, I almost missed it. He casually mentioned that Evelyn had spontaneously decided to head out into the storm to visit a fellow science teacher to borrow some lab equipment, and must have foolishly left her phone charging on the kitchen counter. I gripped my mobile phone so tightly the plastic casing groaned. I asked him which specific teacher she was visiting. Desmond hesitated, playing for time, and said he could not recall the woman's name off the top of his head, but smoothly promised he would have Evelyn call me the very second she returned home, no matter how late it was. I immediately asked where my grandson Miles was. Desmond smoothly replied that Miles had caught a slight winter chill and was already heavily medicated with cough syrup and fast asleep in his bedroom, emphasizing that everything in their home was perfectly peaceful. I demanded to speak to my grandson anyway. Desmond's voice turned cold and patronizing as he replied that he absolutely could not wake a sick child just to satisfy an old man paranoia, and told me to stop stressing over nothing. Then he severed the connection before I could breathe another word. I sat completely paralyzed, staring at the dark screen of my phone while the rich stew went completely cold and congealed in my lap. Martha was watching me with the exact terrified expression she always wore when she instinctively knew something catastrophic was unfolding, but refused to give it a name. She asked me with a trembling voice what Desmond had said. I told her Desmond claimed Evelyn drove through a mountain blizzard to visit an unnamed colleague. Martha lowered her spoon with trembling hands. She reminded me with fierce certainty that Evelyn tells us everything and would have absolutely mentioned an evening trip during our morning text message exchange. I agreed completely. I also knew down to my very marrow that Evelyn would never under any circumstances miss her son's chess game without sending a warning message first. Not once in a decade had she failed to notify us of a change in plans. I looked at the dark windows of our cabin and then out into the howling, snowy night. In 45 years of rebuilding massive machines, I had learned one absolute and undeniable truth above all others. An engine does not simply seize up and fail without a catastrophic reason. A line snaps. A gasket blows. Something fundamental breaks apart deep beneath the steel housing. You never ever ignore the sudden terrifying silence of a machine that should be running. You tear it apart and trace the failure back to its core. I told Martha I would wait out the night, and if Evelyn did not answer by dawn, I would figure out the proper course of action. Martha nodded silently, but her knuckles were stark white as she gripped the armrests of her chair, and neither of us took a single bite of our dinner. The antique grandfather clock in our hallway ticked away the hours with agonizing slowness as the night stretched into an endless psychological torment. I had been lying in bed for countless hours, staring blindly at the wooden beams of the ceiling while Martha's breathing remained ragged and shallow beside me. She had eventually fallen into a restless, exhausted sleep, with her hand resting heavily on my chest. I waited until I was absolutely certain she was deeply unconscious before I carefully and silently slid out from beneath our heavy quilts. I pulled on my thickest flannel shirt, my insulated work trousers, and walked down the freezing hallway to the kitchen in my wool socks. I brewed a massive pot of incredibly strong dark roast coffee and sat at the rough-hewn wooden kitchen table with my phone resting squarely in front of me. There were 0 missed calls. There were 0 text messages from my beloved daughter. I dialed her number 1, last time in the dead of night. It went straight to voicemail just exactly like before. I did not bother leaving a message this time. I simply sat in the suffocating silence, listening to her recorded greeting, playing all the way through to the automated beep before I ended the call. The kitchen was completely silent, except for the crackle of dying embers in the wood stove and the fierce howling of the mountain wind rattling the window panes. Above the heavy oak pantry door hung a framed photograph Martha had taken decades ago. It showed Evelyn at 12 years old, sitting in the massive steel bucket of a John Deere excavator I had been repairing, wearing my oversized grease-stained canvas jacket and smiling so widely her bright eyes were crinkled shut against the sea. "Son," I stared at that beautiful picture for over an hour, letting the memories wash over me. She used to come out to the freezing maintenance shed with me during her winter breaks. She would sit safely on a stack of wooden pallets and ask me endless complicated questions about how hydraulic pressure could lift thousands of pounds of dirt and why frozen steel shattered instead of bending. I told her it was all about understanding the limits of pressure and knowing exactly where the stress points were. She grew up to be a brilliant science teacher because she wanted to guide young minds toward understanding the hidden mechanics of the natural world. I had always told her that was the most noble and important reason to choose a path in life. When the coffee finished brewing, I poured myself a steaming mug. I forced my mind to drift toward the one toxic subject I had been actively suppressing all night: Desmond Hayes. I had never truly warmed to the man in the entire decade he had been a part of our family. He was handsome in a highly rehearsed, aggressively polished, and entirely artificial way. He worked as a high-end corporate wealth manager specializing in liquidating distressed assets, and he always seemed to be performing for an invisible boardroom audience, even when we were just eating simple roasted turkey at our rustic Thanksgiving table. He was exceptionally gifted at making things look significantly better and more profitable than they actually were. Evelyn had loved him fiercely and blindly in the beginning of their romance, but over the past 2 years I had noticed a distinct and terrifying shift in her tone during our weekly video calls. She still laughed for Miles' sake and asked about my engine repairs and Martha quilting projects. But beneath her cheerful vocabulary, there was a tight, brittle, and deeply exhausted quality that had never existed before. It sounded exactly like a thick steel cable fraying under too much tension just before it snaps entirely. You cannot always see the microscopic stress fractures from the outside, but you can hear the strain if you know the material intimately. 6 months ago, I had asked her directly, while Desmond was out of the room, if she was feeling all right because her eyes looked hollowed out and haunted. She had answered far too quickly and defensively, telling me she was just overwhelmed by a long, grueling week of standardized testing at the high school. I had chosen not to push her out of respect for her boundaries. I deeply and bitterly regretted that cowardly choice now. I also thought vividly about a visit I had made to their luxurious mountain home 2 months ago. I had driven up the treacherous pass to fix a jammed custom sliding glass door on their expansive patio. Desmond had arrogantly attempted to fix it himself with the wrong tools and had completely warped the expensive aluminum track, which told me absolutely everything I needed to know about his massive ego and his utter lack of practical boudius. Competence. While I was kneeling on the freezing slate floor replacing the heavy steel rollers, Evelyn had leaned against the doorframe to chat with me. As she reached up to adjust her hair, I noticed a dark yellowing and distinctly finger-shaped bruise on the tender inside of her left forearm. She saw my eyes lock onto the mark, and she violently yanked her long sleeve down, claiming with a breathless laugh that she had carelessly bumped into a heavy laboratory table at work. I had let it go. The memory of that specific ugly bruise now sitting alone in my freezing kitchen made my stomach churn with a violent, sickening rage. Martha spoke softly from the dark hallway entrance, breaking me out of my dark thoughts. She was standing in her long quilted bathrobe, holding a shawl tightly around her shoulders. She begged me to come back to the warmth of the bed. I told her honestly that my mind was running too fast to sleep. She walked slowly over and sat across from me, reaching across the rough wood to cover my scarred, grease-stained hands with her soft ones. She stated quietly that I was agonizing over Desmond. I looked into her eyes and told her I was agonizing over Evelyn. Martha insisted with a trembling voice that Evelyn was a strong woman and that she was perfectly fine, but her voice wavered so dangerously on the final word that we both heard the sheer terror bleeding through her brave facade. I turned my hands over and grasped hers tightly. I told Martha that the absolute second the high school administrative office opened in the morning I was calling them. If they told me Evelyn had submitted a proper leave request or formally called in sick, I would force myself to let this entire nightmare go. I promised my wife I would sit in my recliner and wait patiently for our daughter to call us on her own time. But I swore to her that if the school told me she had simply vanished without a word, I was going to put on my boots and start my heavy diesel truck. Martha did not argue with me or try to calm me down. She just squeezed my hands with a desperate, crushing grip, and we sat together in the freezing, quiet house while the coffee grew bitter and cold, waiting for the pale winter sun to breach the mountain peaks. When the morning light finally crept through the frosted window panes, I was already fully dressed in my heaviest thermal gear and sitting rigidly at the table watching the clock. I watched the minutes tick by with the steady, terrifying patience of a man watching a distant avalanche barrel down a mountainside. At exactly the moment the school offices opened, I picked up my phone and dialed the prestigious academy where Evelyn taught. A woman with a crisp, cheerful administrative voice answered the phone. I introduced myself formally as Evelyn Father and explained, maintaining a calm exterior, that I was attempting to confirm if she had submitted a sudden leave request for the remainder of the week due to a family matter. There was a short, sharp pause followed by the rapid, frantic clicking of a computer keyboard. The woman's professional tone vanished, completely replaced by genuine confusion and concern. She informed me that Evelyn had been completely absent since the previous Friday afternoon, but there was absolutely no medical leave request or personal time off on file whatsoever. She stated that the administration had been leaving frantic voicemails and sending emails to Evelyn directly for days without receiving any response, and asked me nervously if everything was all right at home. I told her I was in the process of finding that out and thanked her abruptly before severing the connection. I placed the phone gently face down on the wooden table. Martha was staring at me, her eyes wide with unadulterated fear. I told her the school had no record of a leave request. Martha's breath caught violently in her throat. She whispered through pale lips that Friday was 5 entire days ago. Evelyn had been missing from her life for 5 days, and nobody in the world knew where she was. Martha pressed her hands flat against the wooden table as if the floor was dropping away beneath her. I stood up with terrifying purpose and walked toward the mudroom to retrieve my steel-toed insulated work boots. I always think much more clearly and ruthlessly when I am wearing the boots that have carried me through decades of brutal labor. Martha followed closely behind me and demanded fiercely to come along for the drive. I stopped, turned around, and spoke to her with a gentle but unbreakable authority. I told her I desperately needed her to stay at the cabin and act as my anchor and backup in case Evelyn managed to escape and call our home landline. She hated the terrible logic of it, but she understood it perfectly. I kissed her forehead, grabbed my heavy winter coat, my keys, my phone, and the massive indestructible steel toolbox I have kept strapped in the bed of my diesel truck for 40 years. Before I backed my heavy truck out of the snowy driveway, I tried Desmond's phone number one more time, hoping to catch him off guard. He answered on the fourth ring. His voice was radically different from the smooth performance of the previous night. It was tight, aggressive, and deeply irritated, like a man who had been jolted out of a nightmare. I abandoned all pleasantries and aggressively informed him that Evelyn had not filed any leave at the academy and had been entirely missing since Friday. I loudly demanded to know exactly what was going on in that house. He paused, letting out a harsh breath, and repeated his blatant lie about her visiting an unnamed friend, claiming she must have decided to extend the trip. I raised my voice to a roar and demanded a specific name, a specific address, and a specific phone number. Desmond let out an exasperated, condescending sigh and told me I was becoming hysterical and needed to calm down. He said, "Harrison, you really need to respect your daughter's privacy and let her have her space to breathe away from your overbearing control." I felt the blood in my veins run completely cold, turning into ice water. I spoke very slowly and very clearly, telling him my name was Garrison. I reminded him with deadly precision that he had called me Harrison twice now. I asked him directly who the hell Harrison was. The line went completely dead. He had panicked and hung up. I sat in my idling diesel truck, the heavy engine vibrating through the steering wheel, and stared fiercely through the frosted windshield. When a meticulous, calculating liar mixes up a name during a crisis, they do not do it randomly. They use names that are actively occupying their frantic thoughts. Desmond had been my son-in-law for a decade. He knew my name perfectly well. I slammed the truck into gear and aggressively headed straight for the treacherous mountain highway. The grueling 2-hour drive up the winding, snow-packed mountain pass to their gated community felt like a descent into an endless psychological hell. I kept the radio powered off the entire time, listening solely to the aggressive roar of the diesel engine and the crunch of studded tires on the ice as the dense pine forests blurred past my windows. I navigated the familiar security gate, flashing my grandfather ID badge, and turned into their ultra-wealthy, secluded neighborhood. The street was lined with massive, modern architectural homes and pristine, undisturbed snowbanks. I slowed the heavy truck as I approached their sprawling glass and timber house, nestled deep in the woods. The property sat still, dark and unnervingly quiet. All the custom automated blackout blinds were drawn completely shut, blocking any view of the interior. The expensive designer porch light was still burning uselessly in the glaring morning sun. Evelyn's reliable all-wheel drive sport utility vehicle was parked in the expansive driveway, exactly where it was always parked. I maneuvered my truck across the street, parked it in a snowdrift, and killed the engine. Desmond had explicitly told me she drove through the mountains to visit a friend, but her vehicle was completely encased in undisturbed snow, proving it had not moved a single inch in days. My heart hammered a violent, painful rhythm against my ribs as I stepped out into the freezing, biting wind. I stood on the icy pavement, analyzing the structure of the house the exact same way I would inspect a shattered engine block, looking for the catastrophic point of failure. The mail luxury courier boxes were overflowing on the front walkway. The massive glass-paneled front door was secured, but what caught my eye immediately was the large bay window facing the east. The heavy blackout blind was snagged, leaving a small gap. I trudged through the knee-deep snow to peer inside. Resting on an elegant wooden pedestal was a rare, delicate tropical orchid that Evelyn cherished. She misted and tended to that specific plant every single morning with the devotion of a mother. It was completely withered, its petals blackened and dead from a total lack of care. Evelyn told me once that keeping that orchid alive in the harsh mountain climate was the only way she maintained her sanity during the dark winters. She would never have abandoned it. I walked forcefully up the front path and hammered my heavy fist against the solid oak door 3 times with enough force to shake the frame. The loud sound echoed menacingly into the woods, but nothing moved inside the house. I roared her name into the wind. I called out desperately for Miles. The expensive neighborhood remained perfectly violently silent. I marched around the side of the house, trudging through the drifts toward the oversized garage. The side pedestrian door was locked tight. I cupped my gloved hands around the frosted glass and peered into the gloom. Evelyn's vehicle was sitting outside, but the expansive interior of the garage was empty. Desmond's expensive imported luxury sedan was completely gone. I returned to the front door and reached deep into my heavy coat pocket for my key ring. 2 years ago, after a series of break-ins in the valley, Evelyn had quietly given me a programmed spare smart key after they upgraded their security system. She had pressed it firmly into my rough hand during a tense family dinner, making sure Desmond was looking away, and whispered with terrified urgency that I should keep it on me at all times just in case. I pressed the electronic fob against the biometric reader. A small green light flashed. It clicked smoothly, and the heavy oak door swung open effortlessly. A horrific wave of stale, freezing air washed violently over me. It smelled like a massive house that had its heating system completely shut off deliberately. Beneath the biting cold was the faint, sickening chemical scent of industrial bleach, masking the lingering odor of rotting garbage. The sprawling open-concept living room looked pristine and meticulously organized at first glance. The expensive leather cushions on the sofa were arranged with geometric perfection, but the perfection looked deeply staged, frantic, and desperate. I noticed a single meticulously crafted miniature plastic gear, part of Miles' beloved hydroelectric generator project, lying discarded on the polished hardwood floor near the hallway entrance, entirely disconnected from his designated workspace. I moved cautiously with my heart in my throat into the massive gourmet kitchen. The deep stainless steel basin was filled with crusted, unwashed dishes. The expansive marble countertops had been wiped down recently with a harsh chemical, but the corners were sticky and mist, revealing a hurried, chaotic cleaning job. I yanked open the massive double-door refrigerator. It contained a few expensive craft beers, some rotting leftover takeout containers, and a massive carton of organic milk that had curdled and expired the previous Friday. There were absolutely no fresh vegetables, no juice pouches, and none of the carefully portioned healthy meals Evelyn obsessively prepared for Miles. I stood frozen in the center of the spacious, freezing kitchen, feeling a massive, crushing anchor of pure dread settling heavily into my stomach. Then I looked down at the floor near the expansive walk-in pantry. The digital smart thermostat panel on the wall was entirely deactivated, but what immediately seized my attention was a low, rhythmic mechanical hum vibrating through the floorboards beneath my heavy boots. I walked purposefully over to the utility access door located discreetly behind the kitchen island. I had helped them carry heavy boxes of holiday decorations down into that subterranean space years ago. It used to be a standard hollow-core wooden interior door leading to a concrete root cellar. Now, to my absolute horror, it was a solid steel, reinforced industrial security door. And instead of a regular decorative doorknob, it featured a massive heavy-duty combination padlock slotted maliciously into a newly installed forged steel hasp that had been bolted directly into the load-bearing studs. The metal of the lock was shiny, pristine, and completely free of scratches, indicating it had been mounted very recently with sinister intent. My throat tightened so severely I felt I was choking on ash. I placed my calloused, grease-stained palm flat against the freezing cold steel of the heavy door and leaned my ear tightly against the metal frame. I closed my eyes tightly and filtered out the howling wind outside and the distant sound of shifting timber. I listened with every ounce of focus I possessed. I heard a sound. It was incredibly faint, weak, and rhythmic. It was a tapping noise rising slowly through the dense material of the door. It was not the random settling of a massive house in the winter. It was deliberate and desperate. I vividly remembered a game I used to play with Evelyn when she was a little girl hiding in the massive maintenance sheds. When I got close to finding her, she would tap 3 times on a hollow steel oil drum to let me know I was getting warm. I raised my heavy fist and knocked forcefully on the steel door 3 times slowly. I paused, my entire body rigid, and held my breath. 5 agonizing, torturous seconds passed. Then, from the dark depths on the other side of the heavy door, came 3 slow, weak, distinct taps. I grabbed the heavy padlock with both of my hands and yanked downward with all my might, but it held perfectly solid, mocking me. My hands began to shake with a furious, explosive blend of sheer terror and apocalyptic rage. I pressed my mouth tightly against the microscopic gap in the doorframe and roared loudly, telling her it was Dad and that I was going to tear the door off its hinges immediately. I heard a muffled, ragged, desperate sound from the other side that sounded exactly like my beloved daughter trying to scream my name through a ruined, dry throat. I turned and sprinted wildly out the front door, slipping on the ice, and launched myself toward the bed of my truck. I threw open the massive lid of my steel toolbox. I bypassed the smaller hand tools entirely and grabbed my 36-inch forged industrial pry bar, a heavy steel sledgehammer, and a portable battery-operated angle grinder fitted with a diamond cutting wheel. I ran recklessly back inside the freezing house, gripping the heavy tools so tightly my arthritic knuckles screamed in agony. I positioned the spinning blade of the angle grinder directly against the forged steel hasp that held the heavy padlock. Squeezing the trigger, a blinding shower of brilliant orange sparks illuminated the dim kitchen, accompanied by the deafening screech of grinding metal. I bore down with all my weight, the smell of burning ozone filling the air. The blade sliced through the thick steel in agonizing seconds. I kicked the ruined locking mechanism aside, grabbed the heavy pry bar, wedged it deeply into the doorframe, and swung the heavy sledgehammer against it. The deafening crack echoed like a gunshot through the empty house. I swung again and again, channeling 4 decades of brutal physical labor and unimaginable fatherly rage into the steel. The wood surrounding the frame splintered violently, exploding outward. On the 4th massive strike, the reinforced hinges sheared off completely, and the entire door tore away from the wall, crashing onto the floor with a heavy metallic clatter. A horrific rush of freezing, damp, subterranean air hit my face, accompanied by the unmistakable foul, sickening odor of a portable chemical camping toilet and absolute despair. I slammed my hand furiously against the light switch on the wall. A harsh, flickering industrial fluorescent bulb buzzed to life, casting a sickly yellow illumination down the steep wooden stairs leading into the concrete bunker. I roared her name into the darkness as I descended the stairs, moving faster and more recklessly than my ruined knees should have ever allowed. The subterranean cellar was mostly empty, save for a few metal storage racks and the humming water heater. In the far darkest corner, sitting rigidly on a thin, filthy camping mattress with her knees pulled tightly to her chest, was my beautiful Evelyn. Her long, dark hair was heavily matted and chaotic, framing a face that was a terrifying translucent shade of gray, completely devoid of any life or color from days without sunlight or proper hydration. Her delicate wrists bore raw, bleeding red friction burns where heavy-duty zip ties had clearly been applied tightly and eventually removed. Her sunken eyes locked onto mine, the exact moment my heavy boots hit the concrete floor. They were wide, feral, and completely shattered, but suddenly filled with a desperate, overwhelming, and agonizing relief. She tried desperately to speak to me, but the sound dissolved instantly into a broken, ragged sob. I crossed the freezing concrete floor in 3 massive strides and dropped violently to my knees, ignoring the shooting pain, and pulled my daughter fiercely into my arms. She collapsed completely against my heavy chest, weeping with a ragged, convulsive full-body intensity that shook her entire frail frame. Her freezing hands gripped the thick fabric of my coat with shocking, desperate strength. I held her impossibly tight, rocking her gently back and forth and whispering over and over into her matted hair that she was entirely safe and that I had her and would never let her go. She choked out broken words, telling me she heard me walking heavily upstairs, but was utterly terrified. It was Desmond returning to finish the job. I assured her fiercely it was only me and that he was gone. I pulled back slightly to examine her face in the harsh light. Her lips were painfully cracked and bleeding, and a massive dark purple bruise covered the entirety of her left cheekbone. I asked her with a trembling voice how long that monster had kept her trapped down in the dark. She wiped her filthy face and told me he had violently locked her in the bunker on Friday night after an explosive argument. She said Desmond had arrogantly brought a woman to the house, a corporate attorney named Valerie, and demanded Evelyn sign massive legal documents, transferring the pristine timberland property she inherited from her grandmother entirely into his corporate holding company so he could sell the mineral rights to a mining conglomerate. When she fiercely refused and threatened to call her lawyer and the police, he violently struck her, dragged her down the stairs and sealed the heavy door, telling her coldly she would stay down there freezing and starving until she changed her mind or died of exposure, which he planned to stage as a tragic winter accident. I pushed the apocalyptic fury down deep into my gut and focused entirely on the immediate crisis. I asked her gently if she was capable of walking. She nodded weakly, her teeth chattering, and I carefully helped her to her feet, wrapping my large arms securely around her waist to bear her entire weight. We slowly and agonizingly climbed the steep wooden stairs. As we finally reached the destroyed kitchen, Evelyn stopped abruptly and gripped my arm with terrifying, hysterical force. She looked at me with wild, desperate, panicked eyes and screamed, asking me where Miles was. Desmond had maliciously told her he sent Miles to a winter boarding camp hours away, but she knew in her soul he was lying. The wooden floor seemed to completely drop out from beneath my heavy boots. In my frantic, single-minded rush to find Evelyn, I had not searched the upper floor of the massive house. I looked into my daughter's eyes and swore to her on my life that I was going to find him right now. I left Evelyn sitting wrapped in my heavy winter coat in a kitchen chair and took the main grand staircase 3 steps at a time, my heart hammering in my ears. I rushed frantically down the carpeted hallway toward Miles' bedroom. The door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open violently. The room was dim, with the heavy blinds drawn tight. His complex scientific models and robotic kits were arranged neatly on the large desk. The bed was perfectly meticulously made, without a single wrinkle. I called out his name, keeping my voice low and steady, assuring him it was his grandfather Garrison. The room remained perfectly deathly still. I thought intensely about the single miniature plastic gear I had seen discarded in the living room, and the meticulous, calculated way Desmond had staged the house to look entirely abandoned. I walked purposefully over to the large walk-in closet and slid the heavy mirrored doors open. I pushed aside the hanging winter clothes and knelt on the floor, pressing my ear firmly against the back wall. I remembered vividly helping Desmond run new HVAC ductwork in this exact closet years ago, and knew there was a small, hollow access space behind the drywall, leading directly into the massive ventilation eaves. I tapped on the cold drywall 3 times slowly. A profound, heavy silence followed. Then a faint, desperate shuffling sound came from behind the panel. I grabbed my pry bar, gently wedged it into the seam, pried the wooden access panel loose, and pulled it away. Huddled deep in the cramped, dusty, freezing darkness of the ventilation eaves was my 10-year-old grandson. He was clutching his knees tightly to his chest, staring out at me with wide, terrified, tear-filled eyes. I softly called his name and reached my calloused hand into the dark. Miles let out a tiny broken whimper and scrambled frantically forward, launching his small body directly into my waiting arms. He felt dangerously light, and his small frame was trembling uncontrollably with the cold and sheer terror. I held him tightly against my shoulder, carrying him out of the closet and into the safety of the bedroom. He buried his filthy face deep in my neck, crying silently, the hot tears soaking rapidly into my collar. I murmured comforting words into his ear, telling him how incredibly brave he was and that his mother was safe and waiting for him downstairs. Miles pulled back slightly, rubbing his dirty, tear-streaked cheeks. He reached deep into his pocket and pulled out a small, sleek digital audio recorder, the kind he used for his school journalism projects. Miles pushed the device into my rough hand. He told me in a raspy, broken whisper that his mother had explicitly told him to hide in the vents if he ever heard violent shouting in the house. He said he crawled deep into the wall architecture he knew so well and stayed there for agonizing days, surviving by eating from a hidden stash of granola bars he kept in his room for hiking emergencies. He told me he used the audio recorder to capture the incredibly loud voices of the adults downstairs because he thought his grandfather would eventually need to know exactly what the bad people had planned. I stared at the small black device in my hand, completely and utterly overwhelmed by the profound, staggering bravery and intelligence of this small child. I kissed his forehead, told him he was the bravest man I knew, and carried him down the stairs. The reunion in the freezing, destroyed kitchen was something I will never erase from my memory as long as I live. Evelyn fell to her knees despite her extreme weakness and pulled Miles into a fierce, desperate embrace, both of them crying openly and loudly, holding each other as if the entire world might end if they ever let go. I stepped away for a brief moment and pulled out my mobile phone, dialing emergency services. I requested immediate medical assistance and a heavy police presence at the address, calmly but forcefully explaining the severe dehydration, physical abuse, and unlawful life-threatening confinement of an adult female and a young child. The emergency dispatcher assured me units were rushing up the mountain pass to the scene. I returned to the kitchen and sat heavily on the floor with my daughter and grandson wrapping my massive arms around both of them, forming a physical, impregnable barrier between my broken family and the nightmare they had just miraculously survived. The paramedics arrived an agonizing 20 minutes later, followed closely by 2 heavily armed police cruisers with sirens blaring. They worked with rapid professional efficiency, examining Evelyn and Miles and starting warm intravenous fluids right there on the living room floor. As they were carefully preparing to load them onto stretchers for the ambulance transport to the regional hospital, a plainclothes detective walked purposefully through the shattered front door, displaying his gold badge. He introduced himself as Inspector Brody. He had a deeply weathered face, piercing observant eyes, and the demeanor of a man who had seen the worst of humanity. I shook his hand firmly and gave him a concise, incredibly detailed account of absolutely everything I had found, from the uncollected mail and the dead orchid to the newly installed steel door, the severed padlock, and the horrific bunker. I handed him the shattered locking mechanism, and more importantly, I handed him Miles' digital audio recorder. I told Inspector Brody with unwavering certainty that my grandson had successfully recorded the entire incident and their criminal conspiracy. Brody looked at the small device with intense professional interest, placed it carefully in a plastic evidence bag, and told me to ride in the ambulance to the hospital with my family, promising he would meet me there the moment the scene was secured. I called Martha from the back of the swaying ambulance and told her I had successfully found them, and they were alive but battered. I heard the sound of her dropping the phone and crying out in pure, unfiltered relief before she yelled into the receiver that she was driving to the hospital immediately, no matter the road conditions. At the busy regional hospital, Evelyn and Miles were placed together in a comfortable private room for intensive treatment and observation. They were utterly exhausted but finally warm and safe. Martha arrived an hour later, bursting frantically into the room and smothering them in an embrace that seemed to heal half their deep psychological wounds instantly. I stepped out into the quiet, sterile hospital corridor to give them desperately needed space. Inspector Brody was walking briskly down the hall toward me, holding a digital tablet and a thick manila file folder. He gestured for me to follow him into an empty, secure consultation room. We sat down across a small metal table from each other. Brody placed the tablet down and leaned forward, his expression grim. He told me he had listened to the entire audio recording from the digital device. He said it was absolutely harrowing, but completely legally actionable and damning. The recording clearly captured Desmond and a woman named Valerie arguing loudly and violently in the kitchen. Valerie was furious and panicking, complaining that keeping Evelyn locked up freezing in the cellar was insane and far too dangerous. Desmond responded with chilling, sociopathic calm, telling Valerie that a man named Harrison, his corrupt notary, was preparing the final forged transfer documents. Desmond explicitly stated on the recording that once Evelyn was broken down enough by the freezing cold to sign over the massive Timberland Trust, he would liquidate the multi-million-dollar assets disappeared to a non-extradition country and Sari Sevenly Heaven in the Devon, leave her to freeze to death, which he would easily blame on a faulty heater. He callously mentioned ignoring the child. He assumed ran off into the woods because the elements would eventually take care of the boy, saving them the trouble. Brody looked at me gravely and explained that Desmond's master plan was to wait until the weekend, force the signature stage, the accident, and then report Evelyn missing, claiming she had suffered a mental breakdown and abandoned the family to wander into the snow. The massive fortune would be gone before the police even started a proper rigorous search. I sat rigidly in the chair, processing the cold, calculated sociopathic evil of the man who had eaten dinner at my table for an entire decade. Brody then told me they were actively tracking Desmond's financial movements, but desperately needed him to make a critical mistake to pinpoint his exact current location before he boarded a private flight. He asked me directly if I would be willing to make a highly controlled recorded phone call to Desmond to bait him into slipping up. He explained that panicking, arrogant criminals often reveal their locations or intentions when confronted unexpectedly by someone they arrogantly believe is ignorant and powerless. I agreed without a single second of hesitation. Brody rapidly set up his sophisticated recording equipment and nodded at me to begin. I dialed Desmond's number. He answered on the second ring. His voice was tight-guarded and dripping with false impatience. He demanded to know what I wanted. Garrison? I kept my voice perfectly flat, deep, and smooth, channeling decades of quiet mountain patience. I told him Evelyn and Miles were currently resting comfortably at the regional hospital, receiving warm intravenous fluids and severe frostbite treatment. I let the massive, heavy silence hang in the air, allowing the devastating reality of my simple words to completely crush his elaborate psychotic plan. Desmond breathed heavily and erratically into the receiver. He tried desperately to maintain his slick composure, stumbling over his words, claiming there must be a massive misunderstanding and that Evelyn was mentally unstable and had run away. I interrupted him calmly and ruthlessly. I told him I had used an angle grinder to cut his brand new steel padlock in half and broken the reinforced steel door off its hinges with a sledgehammer. I told him the police possessed the crystal-clear audio recording of him and Valerie discussing the forged trust documents and the murder plot. I told him his corrupt notary Harrison could not protect him from kidnapping, attempted murder, and extortion charges. I heard a distinct, panicky, violent shuffle on the other end of the line, followed by the sound of a car door slamming shut aggressively. Desmond screamed wildly into the phone that I had ruined absolutely everything and that an ignorant mechanic had no right to interfere with his genius. He yelled that the timberland money rightfully belonged to him for dealing with my miserable, stubborn daughter for 10 years. Then he made a fatal, arrogant error. He yelled at Valerie to start the engine and drive toward the small private airstrip in Missoula immediately before the storm grounded the planes. He violently hung up the phone. I looked across the metal table at Inspector Brody. Brody was already speaking rapidly and forcefully into his police radio, barking urgent orders to state troopers to intercept a specific vehicle heading toward the Missoula private airfield. He looked at me with profound, deep respect and told me I had executed the bait perfectly. Within an agonizing 45 minutes, Brody received official confirmation. Desmond and Valerie had been forcefully apprehended by heavily armed state troopers at a Snowden gas station less than 2 miles from the private airfield. They were currently in custody in handcuffs and facing a massive mountain of severe felony charges, including unlawful confinement, attempted murder, extortion, and severe child endangerment. The terrifying nightmare was officially and permanently over. I walked slowly back into the warm hospital room. Evelyn was sitting up in bed looking vastly better, with the fluids doing their vital work and the color returning to her bruised face. Miles was fast asleep, leaning heavily against his grandmother's chest. I walked over and gently kissed my beautiful, brave daughter on her bruised forehead. I told her Desmond had been arrested and that he could never, ever hurt them again. Evelyn closed her eyes and let out a long, trembling breath of pure relief, leaning her head heavily against my sturdy chest. We stayed in that hospital room for 2 long days until they were officially medically cleared to go home. But they absolutely did not go back to the massive glass house in the mountains. They packed their essential belongings and moved directly into the warm, cozy spare bedroom of our timber-framed cabin in the Bitterroot Valley. The harsh winter months that followed were a slow, deliberate, and incredibly beautiful process of healing and rebuilding. We painted the spare room a bright forest green at Miles' specific request. Evelyn bravely returned to work at a local valley high school, transferring her life and her passion for teaching back to the rugged community where she truly belonged. Miles spent his weekends down at the maintenance shed with me, learning how to weld steel and rebuild carburetors, proving to be just as intensely inquisitive and brilliant as his mother had been. The legal proceedings against Desmond were swift and utterly brutal thanks to the overwhelming physical evidence of the destroyed bunker and the undeniable crystal-clear audio recording my incredibly brave grandson had captured in the dark. I learned a profound and unshakable lesson during those dark, terrifying days. I learned that as a father, your sacred duty to protect your family does not ever expire when your children grow up, get married, and move away. If you ever sense in your gut that the people you fiercely love are being diminished, controlled, or silenced, do not wait politely for them to ask for help. Do not ever ignore the subtle warning signs just to avoid an uncomfortable confrontation. Trust your fatherly instincts entirely. If I had waited one more single day to drive through that blizzard to that house, Desmond would have succeeded in destroying my entire family. Instead, I trusted the deafening silence and tore down a steel door with a sledgehammer to bring my daughter back into the light. Life will always violently test the strength of the things you build, but if the foundation is made of genuine love and unwavering, relentless vigilance, it will hold firm against absolutely any storm.